Food is arguably the most important resource in Age of Empires 2, but all we see in game is just a single set of numbers. Throughout this series, we will be diving in to see exactly what foods each civilization prepared and ate, and how well I can recreate these recipes. This is Meals of Empires. So who were the Burgundians? That's a little bit of the question of today's episode, because the name Burgundian or Burgundy was used for multiple different governments throughout medieval history. It originates with a group of Germanic people arriving from somewhere around Central Europe into what is now Eastern France, around the city of Dijon, known for Dijon mustard. Remember that, that'll come up later. And then the variety of governments through marriage, through alliances, through war, kind of merged and all used that Burgundian name. So first you had the Kingdom of Burgundy, that was in the late Roman period into early medieval period. And then from that you had the Duchy of Burgundy, which became assimilated into the Frankish Empire. Then you have the County of Burgundy, which got assimilated into the Holy Roman Empire. And then through a number of marriages, as I mentioned earlier, you have the State of Burgundy at the end, which also moved into the lowlands, as they're called, or BENELUX, Belgium, Luxemburg, and Netherlands. And so you have very rich soils there that can provide a number of vegetables. And I think the Netherlands provides is the second biggest exporter of vegetables in the world. And that's such a small country. So you can imagine we're gonna have plenty of vegetables in today's episode. The first is going to be roasted Brussels sprouts. They're going to be paired with some honey, some parsley, and some tarragon, my favorite spice, my favorite herb, I should say. Along with that, we're going to have a mustard soup. And to finish it all up for dessert, we are going to have some wild berries. Let's get started with the cooking. We are going to start today with the mustard soup. And so the basic components of a mustard soup: leeks cooked or sauteed in oil. Once the leeks are nice and cooked, we can add some flour to the oil to make a roux. Then that roux is going to be added with some broth that we're going to be making with carrots and onions and some parsley. And then once those are all combined and the soup's tasting good, the last component will be to add some mustard. Only some of the soup is going to have mustard added to it, just because I know my judge later isn't a big fan of mustard, and we want to make sure that she gets to enjoy the soup as well. But we're also going to try to make it as traditional as possible, with plenty of that spicy goodness. For our broth, we're not going to add any oil. We're just going to cook the ingredients in water. And we'll add in our carrots now as well. No need to wait. The last item for our broth is the parsley, as I mentioned. Medieval carrots would have been predominantly in purple or white. And the orange variety, I believe, was further selectively cultivated around Netherlands or Belgium in the late medieval period. So there's definitely carrots, though the prevalence of orange carrots might not have been as high as it is in modern times. And parsley does have a big root, as we saw in the previous episode with the Celts. And parsley, as just like the onions and carrots, is just going to be cut up nice and fine. So there's our broth. We'll leave that for about 20 minutes, and it should be ready by the time our roux is all done. The principal component for our soup is going to be these two beautiful leeks. Both leeks and onions feature heavily in modern lowlands cuisine. For the leeks, we're just going to be using the bottom half. The green upper parts get a little bit too tough. Through the 1369 marriage between Philip the Bold of the Duchy of Burgundy and Margaret of Flanders, the state of Burgundy expanded into the lowlands, which are the influence of a lot of our cuisine today. This new territory outside of the purview of the Frankish kingdom allowed the Burgundians to rise in influence. The fight for political control led to the 100 Years' War, with the Burgundians fighting on the side of both the English and the French in turn. So the main oil in early medieval periods would have been olive oil. There was enough of a Roman influence into the early Burgundian kingdoms in France that you would have a lot of oil, but that did eventually get displaced by butter in the late medieval period, especially the further north you go. But since this is a vegan cooking series, we are of course going to use the olive oil, and we're going to actually use quite a bit. While the pot's heating up, we can open up our wine for today. It is a Pinot Blanc from the Alsace region, Alsace. I don't know how to say it in English, actually. I'm just realizing. Alsace would be in French. I guess that's close enough. And so this would have been within, I believe, the County of Burgundy. It smells like a nice fruity white wine. Yeah, this is a very fruity wine that's probably very realistic for a wine of the medieval period where wines weren't allowed to go super deep into the alcohol. Wines like this would actually be what would be used to make Dijon mustard. Mustard is just mustard seeds that come from either black mustard, brown mustard, or white mustard. And the seeds are ground up, and by grinding up the seeds, you allow different enzymes and compounds that are naturally in the seeds to come together and go through a reaction that gives it all that spiciness. You add a liquid along with that to, I think, help with the reaction, and depending on the temperature of the liquid and how acidic it is, it will affect the overall flavor. It'll control the reaction in some way. So if you add water, you're just getting like maximum spiciness. But what they do with Dijon mustard is they add a white wine, which would be very similar to the white wine we're drinking here. And that allows the spiciness to develop over time. It maintains that spiciness of the mustard. Whereas if you add water, it degrades pretty quickly. More typical Belgian foods that we're used to today include waffles and fries. Waffles were beginning to develop in the late medieval period, but they were unleavened, meaning they had nothing, no yeast or anything to really get them to rise. And we will come back to the waffles when we get to the Franks. Fries, on the other hand, were of course reliant on potatoes to arrive from Europe, which wasn't the case until after the medieval period, or after the time period that we're considering for this series. While the broth and the roux is continuing to cook, we can do the first trivia question. In Age of Empires 2, the coustelier is the unique unit for the Burgundians. What weapon did the coustelier historically use in combat? Think of the etymology of coustelier if you have any French knowledge. The Burgundian coustelier would typically have a short sword as their weapon. They were generally a squire that would be the second in command to the knight. And the etymology of coustelier is similar to the word, the French word for knife, which is couteau, coustelier, couteau. The coustelier would still generally fight from horseback along with the knight, but the remainder of the retinue, that army unit, would have consisted of a few other non-mounted units. You would have the non-combatant page who took care of the admin, generally someone from a royal family who was not quite a squire yet, but on their way to maybe becoming a knight if they survived the battle as a non-combatant. There would be 3 mounted archers, which is interesting because in Age of Empires 2, the cavalry archers of the Burgundians are one of the worst. Then you have a crossbowman, a hand cannon, or someone that had some sort of a gunpowder armament, and a pikeman. So very much a typical AI army. While the leeks continue to saute and break down, we can start on our Brussels sprouts. So yeah, for the Brussels sprouts, we're just going to chop off any hard bits that are at the bottom and then split them in half. Brussels sprouts were selectively grown in the Netherlands and the lowlands in the medieval period, specifically in the late medieval period, but their flavor was still quite bitter, and that's why Brussels sprouts have had such a bad reputation for so long. The breakthrough was in the 1990s, so well after the medieval period, where a Dutch chemist, I believe, identified the compounds that made Brussels sprouts bitter. And through further selective breeding, they were able to remove those from the Brussels sprout varieties we know now. So you might think, oh, Brussels sprouts are just bad because someone cooked them poorly, but really Brussels sprouts have changed in the last 20 to 30 years. So you could think, oh, Colin, you should make it bitter or it tastes bad so it's more historically accurate, but I don't think I want to do that to myself. So we added, I want to say, about 2 tablespoons of oil into our dish. And so I'm going to add just about 1 tablespoon of flour. The important part is just going to be to mix the flour around as much as possible so that it doesn't clump up in any one part. And then we'll cook that for a few minutes just so that the raw flour taste is gone. The purpose of our roux is to thicken up. There aren't really any sources of protein in this recipe. Historically, there would have been fava beans, which we've included in various recipes already, and fava beans and lentils, of course. Those would be the main sources of plant protein. And then, of course, dairy and eggs would have been animal sources. The amount of meat that would have been consumed, at least land meat, is always something contentious for historians, whether the majority of the population could actually afford meat or not. All right, that's been about 5 minutes. So our roux should be all set. So we're going to take our broth and just strain it directly into our pot with our roux. And because both are nice and warm, there shouldn't be any real change in temperature. All of the remaining vegetables that were in our broth could be eaten later as a little stew. We'll just leave them on the side for now. The overall color is actually really good here because the color is, very yellow like mustard typically is. And then the little dark spots almost look like the little spots of the mustard seed that haven't been fully ground up. Here is the mustard we are going to add later. But the main focus here is this is Groninger style mustard. And the city that I'm in right now is Groningen. Same name. And that, I don't think that'll come through. That little tower there, I think is Martini Tower, which is the big tower that's in the town square. Let that keep cooking and developing its flavors, and we'll come back to it after we've worked on the Brussels sprouts. I don't want to overlap Brussels sprouts because they won't roast as well. We won't get all the wonderful flavors. They really need good contact to that hot air that's going to be occurring in the oven. So I'd say we could do another like 10 Brussels sprouts and they'll fit in there fairly well. To them, we're going to add some olive oil to make sure they roast really well. And then the rest of the flavorings or seasonings will be added once they are out of the oven. We don't want to limit how much they're going to roast by adding anything on them just quite yet. While the oven's warming up, we can do the second trivia question. What is the color burgundy named after? What specific item? Okay, Ray already got the answer. The color burgundy is named after Burgundian wine. So here is some Burgundian wine. Of course, this is white wine, so not necessarily the color we're looking for. The color we're looking for is more closely, on camera it looks a little bit more brown. Maybe after some editing, some color correction, this will look a little bit more burgundy in color. Burgundy is like a reddish purple color, and it's used for a lot of these European passports. This is my French passport here. If you look up the hex code for Burgundy, the color online, you'll get a few different interpretations. On Wikipedia, it's a little bit closer to red. What I prefer is a little bit closer to purple like we have for the European passport. But I think it's like a very nice and rich color. And I was even thinking of making the thumbnail for this video have some sort of interpretation with the same color palette that's on the passport of the purple and the gold. So we'll see what I come up with. Since the oven hasn't preheated yet, we can do the third trivia question as well, which kind of ties in with the color. What does the cross of Burgundy, used as the Burgundian civilization icon, originate from? What is the origin of that cross shape? Brussels sprouts are in the oven, but the answer to our trivia question, it originates from the cross of St. Andrew. So the typical cross we think of is the cross that of Jesus, which was a T-shaped, I want to say, whereas the cross of St. Andrew was on its side, a kilter, and that would be more of an X shape. Then the varied edge protrusions that are on the cross, because it's not perfectly straight edges along the cross, those edges, or the variated form is called raguli. They immediately remind me of the branches on the opposite sides of a trunk, so very botanical feel to them. And I think it is supposed to represent that in some manner, though it also just represents hardship. Maybe the same way that you would have like thorns on a rose as something prickly and difficult. I guess the branches maybe mean you were up against odds and some of your branches broke off. I'm not entirely sure. It does look a little bit more rough around the edges, literally. So I get the understanding of that being symbolic for hardship. The Cross of Burgundy was used in several later Spanish coat of arms when the Habsburg dynasty took control of the lowlands and the state of Burgundy. And they also took control of the Spanish crown around the same period, right after the medieval period. Following the Spanish colonial period in the United States, the version of the cross without the raguli is present on the flag of the US states of Florida and Alabama. So I'm going to do a quick taste of the mustard. Oh, wow. I was expecting it to be closer to Dijon mustard, but this has like wasabi levels of kick in it. So I'm definitely going to take it easy when I add the mustard. This is why you taste your ingredients before you add them into the recipes. This is solid. So I think the ratio of water to white wine is what's giving this a stronger kick than what you would have in Dijon mustard. I wasn't ready for the punch, so I want to get an idea what the punch tastes like again. Our wild fruit is the Rode Besse, which just translates from Dutch to red berry. So these are just red currants. Ribes is the genus, and they grow throughout Northern Europe. They're almost considered a weed because of how readily they disperse. But it's pretty much just like your most generic berry, just very round, almost somewhat translucent, with a little bit of a seed in the middle. Very similar to blueberries, just in taste, not really in genetics. But I'm wondering how I want to present these. There's enough variation in the color of our currants that some part of the currant is definitely burgundy, though determining which part is that burgundy color would be a little bit difficult. Next up, we can prepare the remainder of the parsley that will go with our Brussels sprouts as a bit of a garnish. For these, I do just want to get the leaves, and we're going to dice them up very finely. All right, there is our parsley. The other ingredient is our dragon, or tarragon, as it's known in English. The reason why it's called dragon in Dutch is because the specific epithet, or the scientific botanical name, is Artemisia dracunculus, I believe. And the roots are very curled, and that's supposed to imitate a dragon in some way. On Wikipedia, it says it's native to both Eurasia and North America. I'm wondering if that's actually true, or it's just been imported to North America so long ago that it's hard to tell. There's definitely members of the genus that are very familiar to people in North America. You would have California sagebrush, which is all over Southern California, and that is also in the Artemisia genus. Though I haven't really used it in a culinary sense, it's very aromatic and it's wonderful to walk through. I would rate California sagebrush as the best plant to pet, and that's one of the reasons why Abby and I started dating, because we bonded over plants that you can pet while you're going for hikes. Everything's just about done cooking, and we're ready for the last trivia question. What vegetable was refined by a Belgian gardener in the mid-1800s to be grown in the dark without any light? Obviously past the period of this series, but I felt it was important to mention this vegetable because it is very much associated with Belgium and the area.
The vegetable was Belgian endives, or endive. If you saw endives or chicory in the wild, they would just look like a weedy plant that you wouldn't necessarily want in your salad. However, gardener Franz Brissier left the endive roots in the basement of the botanical garden of Brussels. The result was a sprout of leaves expanding from the plant's taproot, and all of these leaves were completely white. Since there was no light touching or hitting the plant tissue, the plant was not producing chlorophyll, which gives it that green color. So the individual leaves were nice and white, and the cup shape make them very good to fill with tasty morsels and serve as an appetizer.
Our soup is smelling fantastic. It smells very rich, which is exactly what I want. I'm going to strain off a little bit before I add the mustard, just so we get our taste tester an idea of what all the flavors taste like without the mustard. And now for our mustard, because it's very strong, I'm going to use a very small spoon, and we're going to put in one little dab and half a little dab and mix that in very, very well. So we're going to add a decent amount of our parsley to the Brussels sprouts. We're going to add our tarragon. The more the better, I would say, for the tarragon. The flavor is fairly mild, so you can't really overdo the tarragon. Adding some salt, very important. We didn't add any earlier just to make sure that the Brussels sprouts would roast well in the oven. We didn't want to dehydrate them. And then the honey, of course. Honey would have been the main sweetener during the medieval period. Honey would have been added to a lot of different foods. I would say more foods than we do in the modern era. Pretty much anything roasted, anything that wasn't a soup, Any baked good could have had honey added to it. Welcome to the Burgundian cuisine. We have some ingredients that I know you'll enjoy, and some that you might be more meh about. So first up, we have the Brussels sprouts. Burgundy would have taken control of Brussels or Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg in the Burgundian State in the late medieval period. So Brussels sprouts would have been available. Brussels sprouts with parsley and tarragon and some honey, and I did remember salt. Next up, we have the soup. So here we have the same soup, but at different points. First, we have the soup just as the broth that I mentioned, and then we have the soup at its full completion that also has the mustard that we have here, the Groninger mustard. So I know you don't like mustard. This is incredibly spicy, so I did not add that much.
I just don't like mustard when you put it on pizza.
Okay. Abby's referring to the tomato tart. And then for dessert, we have Rode Bense.
Say again?
Rode Bense?
Rode Bense?
Which is just translating to red berries.
Rode?
We're both practicing our Dutch now. Our cooking series has turned into a Dutch lesson. Red currants, which would have been all over Northern Europe. So just a nice little delicacy.
They do look delicious.
Yeah, they're like your typical berry, right?
I don't know.
Abby's going straight for dessert. I don't blame her.
A little sour.
So now feel free to try at your leisure. Okay, Abby's giving a face of like, what is going on here?
It started off good. What did you put in this?
I put parsley, tarragon, and honey with some salt. What's surprising you out of this?
Is tarragon like gross?
No.
Can I taste some?
You want to taste some tarragon separately?
Why would you put this on Brussels sprouts? Brussels sprouts are good by themselves.
Because tarragon's such a wonderful herb.
Did you try this?
Yes, I enjoyed it. I think the surprise is affecting your taste rather than your appreciation of it.
Does tarragon have like a licoricey kind of?
Maybe. I was having trouble describing what tarragon tastes like. So if you feel like it has a licorice flavor.
It's not good.
Abby's not a tarragon fan.
This is good.
Okay. And would you like to now try the mustard soup?
So it's just this mixed with mustard?
Yeah, and I strained out the leeks in that one.
Oh, okay. So there's leeks and mustard.
Yeah.
I'd eat this with like a baguette.
Okay, yeah.
Or some cornbread.
Does it remind you of like onion soup?
A bit.
Yeah. Because I feel like leeks and onions have similar, but it's just like enough.
Leeks aren't as sweet as onions are.
Mm-hmm. Any comments on what you tasted?
Would they have put tarragon on their Brussels sprouts?
I think that would be realistic, though there's very little information.
Is there any information?
So the cookbooks of that time period were, like the one I'm thinking of right now is Parisian, and I don't know if tarragon showed up, and I don't think Brussels sprouts showed up.
So then where'd you get the recipe?
From my brain. And yeah, mustard soup is very common in current Dutch culture or cuisine. True. But I have no idea where it came from either. I just know all the ingredients were available at the time period. Ready for scores?
Mm-hmm.
Execution score. Was there anything obviously blatantly wrong?
Tarragon.
The tarragon.
No one in their right mind would put tarragon on Brussels sprouts.
Okay. I'm not going to fight you on that one.
This is what I've just decided just now.
Yeah.
And I know they do that weird thing in Europe where fruit is like a dessert. Whatever. So I guess that can't technically be wrong.
Okay.
You could have added cheese or something.
Yeah,
Mr. Vegan.
If this wasn't a vegan menu, I could have added cheese. You're right. There is so much cheese in this region of Europe.
There, I can dock you a point
because I didn't add bread.
There should have been bread here. Okay. That's all I'm saying. 8.
Okay. And should you serve this to your girlfriend?
I would never eat that.
Because of the tarragon.
Because of the tarragon.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how I feel about fruit for dessert. Let's go with 6.
6, okay. So I believe this is the same score. No.
I mean, risotto balls?
Those are the risotto balls. Oh, the arancini.
So good.
They were good when I remade the arancini.
When they made them?
Yeah.
Mm.
But the original was a little flat.
I was full the next morning when I woke up.
I do have more Brussels sprouts. I can remake the Brussels sprouts right now.
That would be great.
Okay.
I would eat them.
Yeah.
And I'd probably eat that.
I think what's important for the mustard soup is you add just enough mustard.
And bread.
You add just enough mustard
And a baguette.
for the person who's eating it. Because
Yes.
I added
Mustard can be
overpowering.
a bit
But some people are infatuated with mustard and they want equal parts water to mustard. Do you realize how much mustard that would be? That would be like 4 of these jars. You'd be swamped in mustard.
Did we tell your viewers about the mustard pizza?
No. Next week, we'll be off because Abby is traveling with her mom for the holidays. And then the week after that will be the Portuguese. Thanks again for watching. And until then, I'll see you in the comments.